As you might have noticed, we're taping this event tonight, and we're going to have a lot of different speakers. So I'd like to ask the speakers if, when it's your turn, if you can come up to the microphone, it will help in taping the event. And with that, I think we've got everybody, right? So we're going to go ahead and turn this over to our organizer and our moderator, Michael Rice.
I got it. Just before I left home, I got this charming, slightly sad note from little Leon. Had some minor surgery and now have developed an infection. It is very difficult to miss this meeting because I feel so strongly about the issue and the connection of all the issues. Thank you for doing this meeting. Hopefully I'll be back in action soon. That is about where I was coming from, aside from wanting to see the local activists as a group. And there are 12 of us here, and there are several more in the front row, and I don't recognize everybody. So what we will do is eventually some people will drift from here back into the first row, and some first row people will drift up here. This is not a recruitment fair. It is a conversation about what we're doing individually, what our particular strand is, and to see whether all these strands can be woven into a strong rope. You can figure out what to do with that rope. I hope it's non-violent, but we can string up a few people. Also, while I'm here, I happened to discover this wonderful book. It's called The General's Son. It's by an Israeli who has made a long personal trip, as well as many trips from his present residence in San Diego to his home base, where his mother still lives, and where his siblings live in Jerusalem. But he's also made many trips to the West Bank, and I don't remember right now whether he's been able to get into Gaza. But his ideological journey has been a very interesting one, and it's quite illuminating about the issue of Israel-Palestine. We're selling these $20 books for only $15 at the table behind, if there are any still left. So, I guess I represent Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace here. Here's my Neighbors for Peace shirt. On the back, it says, "Turn your back on war." We were started about a month or so after Women Against War began its wonderful rotating fast. Was it at the Women's Building? And very impressive. For the same purpose, let's not go into Iraq. And we have a monthly event, mostly here, mostly on first Thursdays, often a movie, sometimes a panel, etc. And a long mailing list. If you aren't on our mailing list, check in with Trudy and make sure that you are. There are an awful lot of us, about 16, 17, and so please, about 3 minutes. And unless you shout like I do, feel free to use the mic. Where do we start? Let's start with Women Against War.
Shall I stand up? Maybe it'd be easier to hear me without a mic. Women Against War, as Michael said, started wanting to stop the Iraq War. Our focus is on foreign policy and the devastation that U.S. military policy, as opposed to using some diplomacy, causes around the world. Our strategy is a lot of education. On one hand, we do speakers, we've done billboards, we do yard signs, we hold demonstrations and vigils, but also looking for ways to involve people to join us in advocacy with policymakers for change. We try to build that into our actions. Many of us have been working on efforts to empower women for decades. And so I think we enjoy being part of an organization where women do the planning and we use very feminist processes in our work. There are about 400 people on our list, mostly women, and we're a local affiliate of Code Pink. We organize our work into project areas, and right now we have 4 projects. Our Iran project, as you probably know, worked really hard to get this agreement in place, get support for that, and is now working to try to protect it. Also to call for a realignment of U.S. policy in the Middle East, looking particularly at relationships to Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Afghan project grew out of wanting to get out of Afghanistan and is now broadened to be dealing with the U.S.'s endless war making, think Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, right. I mean, it's endless. Yemen, yeah, I said Yemen. Well, so we're looking at drones, we're looking at arms shipments and other ways that the U.S. keeps that going. And again, education and advocacy. And let's see, okay, and Grannies for Peace does several events a year thinking about peace and justice issues. I should say that the Afghan project has done some mingling of issues. We have done work on the outsized role of defense contractors, military contractors in Congress, and that influence on human needs versus military budget. We have also done work on the Pentagon as the major single largest source in the world of carbon pollution and the impact of that on the climate. But Grannies for Peace has worked on all these issues and has done very good work supporting Black Lives Matter. It's had a vigil on gun violence at home and abroad. Excuse me. Sorry, has also worked on veterans' health care. Sorry. Excuse me. Finally, this project that we're talking about, that I handed the leaflet out about, is a good example of bringing 2 issues together, because we're working against Islamophobia to say welcome refugees, but we're also saying, look at what's causing refugees, the wars that are causing refugees. So I think that's a good combination. Then we have our fourth project is our blog on the Times-Union website, Waging Peace, on which we write about all of these issues. So that's it. Thank you.
I think that feeds right into Veterans for Peace.
Okay. All right. I'm Dan Wilcox with Veterans for Peace, and yeah, we do all of that. I think one of the main things that we do locally here with Veterans for Peace is that we show up at a lot of the other events. And I think it's important that we do. I learned that lesson long ago. I was down in New York for one of the early marches. I went with a couple of my poetry buddies, and we were hanging out. And I was wearing my Veterans for Peace hat. And I was interviewed half a dozen times by news groups from all over the world. So my buddies were calling me like the media magnet. But that's because, you know, the war's going on, and they'd see a veteran who's against the war. And many of you remember Ed Block, a long-time worker for peace, and we would go to these events, and they'd see this old veteran in his old Marine uniform from World War II, and everybody wanted to talk to him. And I think that's one of the important roles we play. But I want to tell you a little story, something that happened Monday night at the Del Mar Vigil down out here, which I go to every week. And there were only 3 of us there that night. It was Trudy and Joe and me. And often it's that way. But we get a lot of people beeping the horns and waving. And over the years, I've trained some of the kids to do this as they drive by. Because you see the same people at the same time, you know? People are creatures of habit. So I'm standing there and the light's changing, and a woman is waiting for the light to change, and she rolls down her window. It's like a white SUV, like she's probably got a bunch of kids. She looked like a young soccer mom, if I can put a label on it like that. And she rolls down the window and she says, "It makes me so happy to see you people out here doing this." She says, "It gives me hope." So it made me realize that when we're out there doing all the different things that we do in the community, and sometimes, you know, we don't have the numbers that we think we want or whatever, but we're out there. There are a lot of people, because of their busy lives, they have children, they may be caring for an elderly parent or something, they can't always be there. So think of it this way, if you're there doing something like that, you're representing all those other people who are on our side. And there's a lot of them out there, as we can see from some of the politics that's going on right now. So it's tough to do these issues, and you're banging your head against the wall. But keep that in mind, that there are people out there who are glad you are there to represent them in the community like that. And also you can keep that idea going, because we're there every Monday. They're going to watch the TV news. Nothing's on the news about peace movement. But they know there is, because they just went by and saw their neighbors standing there with signs about peace. So just keep at it.
Let's go to the Palestinian rights.
Hi, my name's Tom Ellis. I'm with the local Palestinian Rights Committee, and our group's been around since the 1980s, since the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. We held our first event, which was a vigil after the Sabra Shatila massacre. We're an educational and an advocacy group, and we can work with most of the peace groups in the Capital District. Upper Hudson Peace Action, Social Justice Center, Solidarity Committee, Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, Jewish Voice for Peace, J Street, Veterans for Peace, Muslim Solidarity Committee. We had a play at Siena College a few years ago, a play about Rachel Corrie. We've had many speakers over the years at SUNY Albany. A couple of times we've had billboards. We just had one with other groups on Interstate 90. You may have seen it. It was up for about a month. Not an electronic one, but a paste billboard. About 6 million Arab refugees caused in part the result of all the billions of dollars the United States has provided to Israel in economic and military aid since the 1940s. We write lots of letters to the newspaper. I think that's maybe one of our chief activities. And what I've seen over the years is that the mainstream pro-Zionist Jewish organizations, they never write back defending themselves, and I think it's because their position is untenable. And individual people will write back, but not as members of organizations. So I think that we're winning locally on the issue of the facts, and obviously we're not winning on the ground in Palestine. But there is encouragement with the boycotts, divestments, and sanctions campaign is gaining quite a bit of traction around the world, and I think that it's probably the only thing that, well, maybe the only thing that can force Israel to change its ways with the Palestinians. I think that if we have any weaknesses, is that we don't have a lot of college students with our group, and we're not, as a group, we're not the most skilled with social media. But thanks.
Do we want to go to the parents of the Palestinian Rights Committee, Upper Hudson Peace Action? Elaine?
I don't know if we take credit for that. Tom could maybe clarify that.
I don't know which.
Officially, it's a committee
Well,
of the...
I know what you're trying to say.
There's a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It existed before.
Okay. I'm with Upper Hudson Peace Action. My name's Elaine Klein, and so the Palestinian Rights Committee is one of the affiliates locally of Upper Hudson. So that's what he meant by saying, but I'm nobody's mother in this room. But this does sort of feel like some kind of big family reunion where we're explaining ourselves, yet we're all on the same, you know, in the same album to begin with. So I'll tell you a little bit about Peace Action, but you probably already know a lot about it. And if you're not on the list, I also have a clipboard and a sign up, and I'll leave it back there and you can get on the list. So the background of Peace Action is that we're the largest national membership-based grassroots peace organization, and we trace our roots back to 1957 to the organization National Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, SANE. And then in 1987, SANE merged with another anti-nuke group, Nuclear Weapons Freeze Campaign, FREEZE. And then it took a little while, but in 1993 it got renamed to Peace Action. So we're national, and then there's state organizations. So we're part of Peace Action New York State, which has its annual meeting this coming Sunday, and you could still go if anybody wants to, or if anybody wants to get more involved in the state organization, you can talk to me and other people like David about it too. But so we do have this connection to a nationwide group and a statewide group, so we get access to knowing what's going on around the state, and we also have some resources from them. So whenever we want to put out information, we can easily go to their websites and crib things, which is nice. And we have a lobbyist in Washington that we could get information from and things like that. And we do much the same. We have a lot of overlap with Women Against War and Veterans for Peace, and we all intermingle and cross-pollinate and everything else. But we have a little bit of our own uniqueness as well. And one of those things that we're doing recently, which is very nice and we're proud of, is Peace Action New York State has started student chapters. And we have one at Albany, and David has been advising them, and they've been doing great. And the vigil they're having for Tax Day was already mentioned, but I wrote a reminder on the little blackboard in the back, so you can't forget it. And they're doing really great, and we voted locally to support them so that the local Upper Hudson now pays the stipend for the student organizer for the Albany Peace Action. So that's something that has really been growing and building throughout the state for Peace Action, and we're very proud of that. And hopefully we'll collaborate even more. It'd be great if a lot of people go to the Tax Day thing. And so we also, as part of our structure, we have a number of branches, and I put this handout on the back, and it lists all the branches, it lists all the local peace vigils, because there's weekly ones like in Del Mar and Schenectady and Chatham, if they're still doing it, Saratoga, and you can look at all there, and if you're wondering for sure that if they're going, there's information for contacting people. And we also do lobbying. We worked on the Iran agreement, for an example. We do, I brought a couple of props. We had a exhibit last year of all these boycott posters. It was at Siena College, and Paul Ream was the one behind that. And so that's an outreach to educate the public. If you want to learn more about Peace Action too, there's a book by Larry Whitner. And you can find us at community events like the Tulip Festival in Albany, where we do a lot of outreach, and the Schenectady Kids Day, and we do things like, you know, projects with children. And there's peace signs in the back of the room. We have an electronic sign that we got from Peace Action New York State, and we installed it at the Social Justice Center this past year. And that's an example of how we overlap and help support other groups too, because we reached out to get some ideas from other groups of what to put on the sign. So just as an example, some of the things on it are Black Lives Matter and Prevent Iran War, No Islamophobia, no nukes. I won't go on, but there's a whole list.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders is on there because that's another point, thank you, that Peace Action has endorsed Bernie Sanders, and it's a big deal because we don't always endorse a candidate. So we can wholeheartedly go to it. And a couple other things, we've had our annual dinner speaker on police violence and things that took place in Ferguson, and we've had anti-Islamophobia bumper sticker going, and different things like that too. And monthly film series and continuing push for anti-nukes. We usually have programs in August.
Thank you. Let's shift a little bit to some environmental issues. Dominic.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Dominic Calsolaro. I'm representing PAWS in Albany. It's People of Albany United for Safe Energy. And Mark, member of Youth Citizen Action. Thank you, Mark. We meet the first and third Thursdays of the month. We used to meet every week. It's tough on us. We started after the crude oil trains coming into Albany and down in the port, right behind the Apprentice Homes. It's a Albany Public Authority, public housing complex. There's a couple hundred kids and probably somewhere around 700 residents maybe in that complex. It's South Pearl Street. The trains, the sidings are right behind the homes, about 25 feet behind the homes, about 10 feet the first rail is behind the playground. And the issue came up with health and safety, and it's really a justice issue, it's an environmental justice issue. It was still active also going, we're kind of like the point group for the May 14 action, the global action on break free. So we're supposed to come running through PAWS locally, even with other groups, but a lot of people in PAWS involved with that. And it's still very active. We've done a lot of outreach, we've had a lot of press events. When something happened, we'd be out in front of the DEC building, in front of the Governor's Mansion. We do our annual gigantic anniversary. I use the word anniversary because people think it's a good thing. But of the 47 people that were killed on July 6th, a couple of years ago. This will be the third anniversary this year. So involved with that, and again, I think it all ties in because most of these wars that we're talking about are probably over oil, and it's again oil and profits, and people's health and safety are put way ahead of profits for oil companies and railroad companies, and You know, these people down as apprentices, they have the air pollution, that 787 is right overhead. So, South Pearl Street gets hundreds of tractor trailers and semis coming in and out of the port and going to 787. And then you throw in the crude oil trains, and the scrap metal place, and the recycling center, and Global, and Buckeye Partners, and, you know, and there's people living there, and nobody seemed to care, and, you know, the DEC helped us greatly. They did a couple of 1-hour air studies, you know, for 5 weeks, you know, twice in 2 years, so big deal. You know, so it's definitely it's a justice issue, which is what Mike's theme for this was. You know, no justice, no peace, and that's really what it is, and that's what we're making the big free action. Again, it's really over justice, and I think it all ties in together with all the different groups.
Thank you. I need to editorialize for a moment and jump for a moment to Gene Finley for Muslim Solidarity Committee, because it was Dominic as a Common Council member who in 2010 got unanimous approval for a resolution requesting a review of some of these preemptive prosecutions of Muslims on invented terrorist plots, FBI invented terrorist plots. Thanks for the breadth of your activities, Dominic, and Jean, tell us about Muslim Solidarity Committee.
Well, the Muslim Solidarity Committee started in October 2006, right after the convictions for terrorism of 2 Muslim men in Albany, and I'm sure you'll know the names, Yassin Aref and Mohammed Hussein. And this was the big terrorism trial for Albany. There had been several people, such as Joe, I know other folks who we don't see a lot of, who had been attending the trial and who had kind of come together to say this is an outrage. But really the group coalesced right after the convictions, because I think we all thought that convictions would not happen. Because it was so clearly a setup with an informant who we call an agent provocateur. This was a sting operation, which means it was not real. Nothing happened. It was fantasy. No one really expected these convictions to happen. Our group came directly out of the community, because while we were not at the time close to the Muslim community in the Capital District, certainly not the way we and many other groups are now, we realized that we needed to be. So the group began with 2 people from the area, one from Bethlehem University of Peace, Kathy Cowan, who many of you probably remember, the other May Safar, who was an Iraqi refugee and citizen of the United States, came together, put out a call to the existing groups at the time and said, come to a meeting. We don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to talk. And that's how we began. So the group really was existing to support the families of the 2 men. Between them, there were 2 wives and 10 children. Each had a wife, not 2 wives here and 2 wives there. We always had to be careful with our publicity. And with good reason, because at the time, I would wager to say that the first wave of anti-Muslim feeling was still, from 9/11, certainly was still going very strong. And there was revulsion, rejection, to try to put it neutrally, disclaimers, from the general public about Muslims. And here we were not only talking about Muslims, but about Muslim terrorists, and we always refer affectionately to the T word, which you can say now, but you really couldn't say it then. And people would not listen to you. They would shut down completely. So we were advocating for the families of the two men. We were fundraising, and we said we're going to keep this case in front of the public, however we can do it. So over the years, it's been 10 years, over the years, every year on the anniversary of their arrests, which were August 4th, 2004, we do some kind of public event, whether it's a march. A couple of years ago, our own Steve Downs became a playwright, and we wrote a play and performed the play at the Masjid As-Salam on Central Avenue. Several very important things, however, came out of the Muslim Solidarity Committee, and by the way, we're still going. One was a very strong liaison with the Muslim community in the Capital District, which now, as many of you know, Islamophobia is the issue du jour. And we're on the second wave of Islamophobia, which promises to be far worse and far more destructive than the first wave. So we joined with them in very many activities over the years, but also to show that there was community involvement and community. Muslims are part of our community too. We are the Capital District community, whereas before perhaps they were purposely not visible and quite terrorized by the Araf Hussein trial. I think that is not the case today, and all credit goes to the Muslim community and some of their leaders for coming out and saying, here we are community members as well. We want to be part of the community. And I think to a lot of groups which said basically the same thing. So we promoted some understanding there. The other thing that came out directly from the Muslim Solidarity Committee was August 2008. After a small group of us had studied not only the Araf Hussein case, but began to hear of hundreds of other cases throughout the country of the same kind of preemptive prosecution of Muslims, always of Muslims, although it's not only of Muslims, happening over and over and over and over again throughout the country. We formed an organization called Project Salam, which stands for Support and Legal Advocacy for Muslims. And I think we're a bit unique in that we have a strong legal component, thanks to two of our intrepid lawyers who have educated the rest of us on the ground terrifically about the law and about civil liberties and about the Constitution and about a whole bunch of other things that none of us ever knew before, but we do now. So Project Salam has really become international, based here, expanded statewide, expanded nationwide through all these cases. Families, lawyers, communities, activists, etc., and certainly now international. We're kind of getting known, and that's 99% good, and the 1% says, ooh, international, huh? Because, as you know, things have happened internationally with regard to terrorism, so it seems as though it's a wheel within a wheel, and yet we go forward. If Dominic would like to talk a little bit about the 2010 resolution, which kind of directly relates to this, please be my guest.
Very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, so in 2010, Lynn Jackson was involved with these projects. Came to me as a county council member in Albany and said, you know, we need to do this. The Muslim groups are being targeted by the FBI, by the government, they're being prosecuted, persecuted in the sting operations, and Steve Downs and Kathy Mail helped write the resolution, and in terms of agent provocateurs and then preemptive prosecution. And so she came to me and said, can you do a resolution on common council? And I was a little iffy because it's something I've been on the council now for 9 years, something we have never done anything similar like this. So she had me at the public library in Albany, main library, and said, okay, all right, we'll put it together, help, write it up, we'll get it written up. And that night, was in April, I had on the agenda, we were going to vote on it, and I was kind of wishy-washy. And we had all these people came, it was amazing. I never saw anything like it. I don't think we had something pretty close this year when the common council also passed a resolution on Muslims. But people came, we had members of the 465 from New Jersey, we had people from the Newburgh 4 group, of course our own Albany group, we had people who came from Washington, Virginia, all came to Albany, a little common council in Albany for this resolution on preemptive prosecution and major provocateurs and stings. I mean, we had a march down Washington Avenue to Albany City Hall, and then they packed City Hall, everybody got up and spoke about the issues, including some of the children of the family members, and then the council members started talking. And it was like even Carol McLaughlin, president of Common Council, said that she had never seen anything like this. She was absolutely amazed. And Jimmy Sano was there at the time, and he talked about how the Italians and the Japanese are interned on World War II, and somebody, the African American members were talking about the racial injustices and the civil rights movements, and it really kind of like we're trying to do here, getting a coalesce together, all different groups, and people really related to it. So it was an amazing night. I almost wasn't going to pass it. I had a couple members come over, and they didn't like the term agents provocateur, and there's a couple other things, so they wanted me to amend the resolution, and I didn't want to amend it. So we had a little bit of a break yet, or a public comment period. I kind of came over, and then what was really amazing was two of the freshman council members, Ron Bailey, who's still there now, and Lester Freeman, luckily didn't win his re-election, but it was luckily he was there then. Came and said, listen, we can get this done. I said, you sure you guys are voting for this? He said, if you're voting for it, I have the votes to pass it. I'm not sure what some members, so let's vote on it. So 10 of the members voted yes, and the ones that didn't vote, they didn't vote no, they voted what they call present, because they weren't sure if they wanted to be on the record for supporting this. It was mostly conservative guys, and Kathy Milne, because she was there representing, works for the Kindle group there. Michael O'Brien, who wasn't going to support it, who was a veteran, when he heard that Kathy Milne was there, and the attorney was supporting it, and Kindle was a Marine, and he had no problem with it, that somebody in his staff could be working on this issue, that he supported it. So it's amazing when you have the different groups, you don't know who from this group might, have an influence on Joe Smith or Mary Jones, you just don't know. And so he turned in and voting for it, which was very helpful. And it was just, really was an amazing night. And then Robert Smith and I, we spoke at other places. Steve took me down to Washington with Barbara at the Press Club, and I spoke at Islamic Center in Long Island, and I spoke at a few other places. We tried to get it past other places, but it's amazing. It's just, we're finding out now, just getting the Islamophobia resolution passed, we're having all this trouble with, what's wrong with people? You can't have a resolution in your local government saying Islamophobia isn't a good thing, why can't we just you pass a resolution for it, and we're having awful trouble with the county right now. They actually have groups coming out against it, against people trying to say let's prevent Islamophobia, so it's crazy, but it really was an amazing night. Probably, it was one of the ones that you never forget, and kind of made it worth, all the effort to get onto the council. It really was. And then I met all these great people, and they're still making me work. So that was good.
We'll get back to environment in a moment, but let's go to Islamophobia. Sister CANY.
I'm something of an amateur in this group. I don't even know how I got on the list to be invited to the.
I guess it must know. You might not know.
Anti-Islamophobia Committee when it was starting. I see a few people I see all the time, but I see a lot of people I don't see all the time. But anyway, the Islamophobia Committee, Anti-Islamophobia Committee was formed after the attacks in California. There was some talk of incidents here, some harassment of female students at SUNY, and then the memory of what had happened earlier at the mosque on Central Ave. So the committee was set up, and it has 3 prongs. There's a defense committee that's just a commitment to show up. I mean, there's an emergency call list, and it's just you'll show up if there's any sense of anything going to be harassed or attacked or whatever. Then there's the committee to draw up resolutions, which successfully got one through our Common Council, there's Albany, and also the county legislature. And then there's a committee to match Muslim speakers with people interested in learning more about Muslims. So we've got a list of speakers and then a list of places where they're needed. And the group meets Sunday night up at the mosque on Central Avenue about at 5 o'clock. And it's maybe 2 or 3 weeks between meetings, but that's sort of the drift of it. And I'm just gonna, as I say, I drifted in and out of things, you know. I was in the U.S. out of El Salvador way back, and then I drifted out, and you know, I was in the Homeless Action Committee. I'm still in the Homeless Action Committee with the shelter on Pearl Street. So my kinds of things kind of went towards more economic things over time than strictly peace things, although I always show up at peace things. And I just want to sort of make a pitch. I went to a very similar gathering of progressive organizers in May of 2015 that was called by Sandy Stubing. And I suggested setting up a steering committee to facilitate cooperative action in Albany and vicinity, but my suggestion didn't go anywhere. So what it amounted to is we all sort of looked at each other and smiled and walked out, and that was that. And like when I got sort of asked about this one, I thought, here's going to be another night we're going to look at all each other and smile, and then we're going to walk out at the end. So I was putting together something that said, try to get a steering committee of some type that would build bridges between groups and broaden our outlook. Again, you look around this room and you see what is not here. So the steering committee that would try to focus on basic issues: anti-racism, decent wages, affordable housing, emergency food, and maybe it could select 2 cooperative actions a year. You know, just this would be held up and we would all go to it. You know, we wouldn't be committing to 24 more meetings to sign up on the 3rd Tuesday after the 2nd Wednesday, right? But we would go, all right? You know, possible actions. You could have a People's March on the Capitol in conjunction with the People's State of the State event, which the Hunger Action Network holds just before the governor's budget speech. Or if you didn't want to coordinate with that, you simply could have an anti-hunger day. A joint effort with CANY and other interested groups to push for raise the age legislation. An action with Black Lives Matter or other groups to pressure for justice for Marquise Dixon, the 16-year-old boy who's serving 9 years for stealing the pair of sneakers, all right? I saw on television tonight that a man who broke his child's leg, his infant son's leg, got 7 years, okay? So anyway, or an action with United Tenants of Albany to encourage city officials to provide more affordable housing. And as I say, I mean, I'm coming over time more onto the bread and butters and like the absolute outrage of our own place in time, not away, right here in Albany where we're willing to let some of these things happen. You know, the culture is moving away from anything that even faintly resembles values. And I think, you know, you've got to try to get the lowest common denominator if you want. You know, something that nobody can say, I don't care about that, or let it go on anyway. And this is the route to more diversity, which the routes we're currently taking don't get us there. And it's not just you know, ethnic diversity. In a way, it's class diversity too. And we could reach out to Black Lives Matter, to the Center for Law and Justice, to a village, which is the Lincoln Square neighborhood thing. I mean, we could. And again, as I said, I'm going to hand out this in the end. I didn't have enough copies, but anybody that's interested in talking about it, I would like to talk about it. You know, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm happy to smile at everybody. You know, but it doesn't get you anywhere.
Thank you. We're going to actually go to CANY next. What does CANY stand for?
Capital Area Against Mass Incarceration. I'm Naomi Jaffe, and I'm representing both Capital Area Against Mass Incarceration and New York State Prisoner Justice Coalition, and that was a passionate lead-in from Sister Honora about the issue, leading really to the issues that CANY and the New York State Prisoner Justice Network represent, and the ways in which racial injustice and white supremacy are at the root, not only of the work we do, but of the ways that we connect with all of the other issues that are being represented here, the way that U.S. aggression and domination globally are based on the idea that this country, this white supremacist country, has the right to rule the world, and the connection of that with mass incarceration and police violence and their impact on communities of color here. So that ideology is the root of what we do, and of our work against mass incarceration and against police violence, and it also is the root of our connectedness with all of the other issues that are represented here. So thank you, Sister Honora, for that passion. And this is a time of tremendous horror in the world in regard to violence and repression. So I just want to read you a little vignette that I think gives a sense of the connection between white supremacy and mass incarceration. This was written several years ago by a dear friend of mine named Herman Bell, who's been incarcerated now well over 40 years. He was a Black Panther member of the Black Liberation Army. He was convicted of killing a police officer in the 1970s. And this past week, he was just denied parole for the 7th time. Those are 2-year hits each time. So he has served, beyond his minimum sentence, he has served 14 years. He and a small group of other Black Panthers from that era are among the longest held political prisoners in the world. Actually, another member of that group, Abdullah Majid, just died last week in prison. So prisons, repression, and racial injustice and those connections. And Herman wrote this several years ago. What does doing 25 to life mean to me? As I mull over this question, I am reminded of Elmina, the Portuguese slave fortress located on the west coast of Ghana, from which enchained Africans were led through its infamous door of no return to the holds of waiting slave ships that would take them to the New World. I, too, feel as though I've walked through a door of no return. The issues among the main issues that CANY is working on, Sister Honora mentioned one of them, Marquise Dixon, who was, as a teenager, he's a couple of years older now, but as a teenager, convicted of stealing a pair of sneakers and sentenced to 9 years. He's serving that time in Coxsackie, an adult prison. One of the reasons that we fight for Raise the Age, the current Raise the Age bill, by the way, would not have helped Marquise Dixon because they've managed to leave teenagers who have committed violent crimes out of it. So this is, again, one of the bases for advocacy. If you demonize people who have committed violent crimes, you're not going to reduce mass incarceration. You're not going to do much good for these teenagers either. So Raise the Age, all kids, all crimes is one of those issues. So Marquise Dixon, very specific community support for Marquise and his family. and a campaign to reduce that sentence and appeal. And we are part of a campaign to reduce that 9-year sentence. Other one, as many of you have probably heard, is our campaign for justice for Dante Ivey, who was killed by police taser a year ago, more than a year ago. As there's been an ongoing campaign, the district attorney's office, which managed to get 9 years from Marquise Dixon, did not manage to get any kind of indictment against the police officers who killed Dante Ivey. In fact, the city of Albany has pretty much continued to insist that everybody followed the procedures. They didn't say there was nothing wrong, but they said there's no culpability there. So CANY has continued to insist on major changes in accountability, in police procedures, in the use of tasers, in the use of police violence, and in racial profiling around stop and frisk. A third campaign that CANY has been involved in, and probably in some ways the most controversial one, is 3 young women of color at SUNY who reported being assaulted and with racial epithets on a city bus, and who were later accused of having reported that falsely, and were themselves charged with false reporting and assault. Our position is, how come all of a sudden everybody believed the police account of this? Everybody said there's a video that doesn't bear out the young women's story. If you see that video, you'll see that it doesn't bear out any story. You can't tell anything from it. So all of a sudden there was this incredible racial backlash against these young women, a backlash which we are convinced was based on people waiting for an opportunity to backlash against Black Lives Matter, to say that Black Lives Matter is all a hoax. And there were threats and nooses and racial epithets against these girls. And CANY, I'm very proud to say, was really the only public voice that said, you don't know what happened here. How come all of a sudden we believe the account? We believe that the girls must have been lying and that they're culpable, and that they're, even the judge in the case said if they did this horrible thing, this was a shame. And there was just a public backlash against these young women before any of the information was established. And so this is the third campaign that we're involved in. We're also involved, CANY is also involved in some legislative support for issues around incarceration. Parole is one of them. That was one of the reasons that I read you the little piece from Herman. Again, each of these issues is a fundamental issue of racial justice. Parole, the reason that we work on parole is that it's one of the most, in a horrible system of mass incarceration, parole is one of the most egregiously unfair. The parole board has pretty much unaccountable discretion to do whatever they want, and they are subject to attacks from the media and particularly from police officers, and so they tend to not want to let anybody out, basically. And what we've already got in those minimum sentences is the longest sentences of any country in the world, way beyond the need for public safety. And then when you've served your minimum, if they don't like your crime, if they think they're going to get backlash, there's no route out. That's what Herman is saying. There's no door out. Nothing that you do in the 40 years that you're incarcerated can prove that you're not a danger to society. So that we have a very good piece of legislation that we're fighting for. It's called the Safe and Fair Evaluations Parole Act, Safe Parole. I have a petition here that I would love for you to sign. I'm about to pass it around. The Safe and Fair Parole Evaluations Act would not allow the parole board to re-sentence based on the nature of your crime. It would require an evaluation of who you are and your current danger and what you represent at this moment, not what you did, or in some cases actually didn't do, at the worst moment in your life. Underneath this little pile of petitions that I'm about to circulate are organizational endorsement forms. If you have an organization that, for the Safe Parole Act, if you have an organization that's not on the list on the back of that form, please take a form and take it back to your organization. Organizational support as well as individual support is really important for the Safe Parole Act. Thank you.
I have, why don't you go next?
I'm Mark Schaefer. I wear multiple hats, but really my core commitment is as a Democratic Socialist member, Democratic Socialists of America. I'd like to define Democratic Socialism as the golden rule, which is common to many religious and ethical traditions. They teach it, they don't always practice it, especially against heretics and dissidents. But applying the golden rule to politics and economics and social relations, there are many forms of oppression, racism, patriarchy, xenophobia, militarism, which are much older than capitalism. But corporate capitalism is a dominant form of power in the society we live in. And the corporate power pervades all the other issues. And the way the 1% plutocracy can stay on top and rule the 99% is by using those tensions and potential animosities like racism, xenophobia, and so forth as wedge issues to divide the working class majority against itself and stay in power. We had an active Democratic Socialist group in Albany. When I arrived in Albany, we lost a few key people, and we have a program we call the donut problem. Our worldview says we have to get involved in the first social justice movements and work, to get them to unify against the 1%. But we had a field organizer who had a slogan, present in every struggle. I don't have the Tom Sawyer aptitude of getting other kids to paint the fence, so I sort of joined many of the other things, Solidarity Committee, Peace Action, Citizen Action, various environmental groups, Occupy, and work with a perspective of finding solidaristic, unifying issues that can get the various movements to reinforce each other. And I'm hoping with the Bernie campaign, the ideas of democratic socialism, demonstrating it's not radioactive even in this country, that it may be possible to put together a explicitly socialist organization in the Capital District that will carry forward the political revolution that's only beginning with the Bernie Sanders campaign. TSA had a project before Bernie announced to help persuade him to announce, to show that he had a lot of support. Other projects we've worked on include Economic Bill of Rights, working for alternatives to corporate globalization from below, and things like that. The issue I work on most is climate justice. We have this slow-moving but slowly accelerating existential threat to our civilization. As Naomi Klein has said in her book, This Changes Everything, that unless to change everything. We need everybody. And that's that majoritarian perspective. I wrote a sort of a synoptic strategic piece, which is on the back there. Actually, the first version was back in the 90s. After the Exxon Valdez, it's evolved, but it has a sort of a shopping list of solidaristic issues for the environmental justice movement, which is broader than just the climate issue. It includes green jobs, just transition for the workers in the fossil fuel industry, because the job issue is the #1 issue that the Exxons and the tree cutters always use to divide the workers from the environmental movement. And that's something that the climate justice movement has been very conscious of. In the People's Climate Movement, a number of unions were very prominently involved. So that's one of the core demands. There's the racial justice, environmental justice. Dr. Bullard raised the slogan of environmental justice in the case of black communities in the South that are always getting dumped on. And we see it now in Flint. We see it at both ends of the energy issue. In the extractive side, the First Nations next to the tar sands, uranium mining on Indian reservations, and then the impact of the climate disruption, lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans with Katrina, the Rockaways in New York with Sandy, flooding in Bangladesh, drought in East Africa. The Syrian civil war actually began with a drought and rising food prices. Food protests brutally repressed by the Assad regime. Some of the Syrian military didn't want to shoot down their own family members, turned the guns around, and it became a civil war. And that's going to be an escalating pattern as there are more and more crop failures, more and more refugees. The International Red Cross, I think, projected one of these two figures for mid-century, either 60 million people threatened with famine just in Africa, or 300 million refugees. So that's what we're working to prevent in the climate movement. But we have ExxonMobil and the Koch brothers, and the other fossil fuel interests, with something like $20 trillion invested in proven reserves of fossil fuels, which if they're burned, they would push the climate system not just to these accelerating disasters we've seen, but to a global catastrophe with the ice caps melting and coasts around the world being flooded for miles inland and billions of people becoming refugees. So that's what we're up against. And the approach that's explained in this book, This is an Uprising, How Nonviolent Revolt is Shaping the 21st Century, has a lot of examples of an approach for strategic mobilization, as examples like Gandhi's Salt March, the Birmingham campaign of the SCLC, the Occupy movement, which, although it was not sustainable in that form, raised the issue of the 1% versus the 99% into the mainstream of American discourse that Bernie Sanders has picked up on, and it's resonated with millions and millions of voters. So I want to commend this book. I have this piece on capitalism, socialism, and sustainability, and another piece, Yes, Justice, Yes, Peace, outlining a perspective on war peace issues to unify at least a strong majority of 99% to progressively change the system.
Thank you. May I suggest that that end of, you say, that end start trading seats with other representatives of groups. And meanwhile, we'll go on to Jewish Voice for Peace.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Carmelli and I'm representing Jewish Voice for Peace, and I just want to say that I've only been in the Capital District for a couple of years, and so it's pretty impressive to be among so many activists who are doing so many different things. There's a lot of activity here, even if it doesn't always seem that way. I'm a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, and I also work with the Palestinian Rights Committee. Jewish Voice for Peace Albany is a local chapter of a larger national organization, Jewish Voice for Peace. The national organization was founded in 1996, and it currently has 61 chapters, 215,000 members and supporters, and these are Jews and non-Jews. Some of the big famous supporters of Jewish Voice for Peace are Naomi Klein, Noam Chomsky, Judith Butler, and playwright Tony Kushner. Because it's a national organization, I'm actually going to read exactly what their supporting statements are, because I don't want to. A U.S. foreign policy based on promoting peace, democracy, human rights, and respect for international law. An end to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. A resolution of the Palestinian refugee problem consistent with international law and equity. An end to all violence against civilians, and that's on both sides. And peace among the peoples of the Middle East. And one of the ways that we hope to accomplish that is by ending the U.S.'s unending support to Israel. If everyone here saw some of the speeches that were recently given by our candidates at the APAC conference a couple of weeks ago, it was absolutely horrendous to see the kind of connection and to see how, in order to get elected in this country, it seems as if you have to commit to unwavering support for Israel and offering more and more money for Israel's military, no matter what they do. One of the things that I think is really important about Jewish Voice for Peace is that we serve as an alternative to the dominant Jewish perspective in the United States that is very pro-Israel, very Zionist, and our role is really to show that Jews are not a monolith. We have multiple opinions, and that you can be a good Jewish person and you don't have to be a Zionist, or you don't have to be an Israeli, and really to show that those are three separate things. There's the Israeli nationality, there's a Zionist political ideology, and there's the Jewish faith. And so there are Zionists who are not Jews, there are Jews who are not Zionists, there's Israelis who are not Zionists, and there's Israelis who are not Jews, and those are the people in Palestine who are living under a different set of rules because they don't have, they're not Jewish. And we find that to be terribly disturbing and wrong. Some of the national campaigns that Jewish Voice for Peace has worked on, there was a big push to skip the speech when Benjamin Netanyahu came and spoke to Congress, and everyone stood up and down, clapping out of control for everything that he said, even though he was sort of coming with the invitation, not with Obama's invitation, and it was a sort of slap in the face. They've also had a campaign to oppose Airbnb. Airbnb is that website that allows you to stay in different people's homes and rent those out. Some of the places that you can stay are actually in a settlement in the West Bank, and so there's a campaign going on right now to make sure that that's not an option, because that's an illegal settlement, and so you shouldn't be able to stay there. There's other issues with Airbnb, but they've also pushed the retirement investment firm TIAA Cref to drop Caterpillar from their list of investments, because Caterpillar supplies bulldozers to the Israeli military. One of those bulldozers, as we know, ran over American peace activist Rachel Corrie twice and killed her. Caterpillar is very much involved in the physicality of the occupation and making sure that it maintains its infrastructure. The Albany chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace came together in the spring of 2014, and we really grew much stronger in the summer of 2014 when there was a horrific assault on Gaza, and Israel killed approximately 2,100 people. Of those, about 550 were children. So we had weekly demonstrations at Dana Park And it was actually amazing to see how many people came out to those. There were a lot of people who had never participated in a Palestinian Rights Committee or a Jewish Voice for Peace activity before. There were a lot of people there. Some of the work that we've done is, again, bring in speakers. We did a Hanukkah Black Lives Matter vigil, which was, we've done 2 of those now. We've also met with our representatives to try to encourage the Iranian nuclear deal. We've hosted an event with the head of JVP, Rebecca Vilcomerson, and we've brought in doctor and activist Alice Rothschild, who did a presentation last fall. Okay. And most recently, we've been very disturbed by a couple of bills in the New York State legislature. They are anti-BDS bills, and BDS is the nonviolent boycott, divestment, and sanction movement that was called for by Palestinian academics and activists, asking the international community to put pressure on Israel and to help them get their independence and to get their rights. And it's been working, which is why we have anti-BDS bills in various states. So I guess that's an encouraging thing, but it's also really discouraging because a couple of bills have passed the New York State Senate and have been delivered to the Assembly. And so we're sort of waiting to see what will happen with those. But if they do pass, these bills call for creating an online blacklist of individuals, nonprofit organizations, companies, and other entities that support politically motivated boycotts of Israel. So there would be a page on OGS's website that you could click and probably see my name, and probably see Michael Rice's name, and probably Ed's name, and a number of other people. And it would prohibit blacklisted individuals and entities from doing business with the state of New York. It would prohibit state pension funds from investing in companies engaged in politically motivated boycotts of Israel. So this is something that is scary, not just for people in the Palestinian rights BDS movement, but should be scary for anyone who is trying to voice their opinion and non-violently bring about a change in any realm, because if they can create blacklists of one group, they can create all kinds of blacklists. So we don't know where that's going. But one thing that JVP did to draw attention to this issue was recently the national office in New York organized a huge truck that had a picture of 3 people on it, and there were wearing t-shirts that say "Right to Boycott." And it just drove around the Capitol all day and just drove and drove and drove around. And we've also been meeting with various representatives trying to communicate the point that there are Jews who are not on board with this. This isn't something that you have to agree to in order to get the Jewish voice, the Jewish vote in this country, and that there is a plurality of opinions. So we have much more work to do.
Ed.
So I'm Ed Hancock. I'm here because I've met in various of these meetings. I've gotten to go to a lot of meetings. I am an elected representative of the Albany Unitarian Universalist Society. It used to say church on the front, but people didn't like the word church because it has a certain connotation that doesn't fit with everybody, because you don't have to agree to any precepts other than our first principle, which is the inherent worth and dignity of all persons. When I was raised Catholic, I got sent over to that church as I was going on active duty in the Navy back in 1968. And I found the people there who were apparently living up to all I had heard I was supposed to live up to in the Catholic Church. And I didn't have to stop being Catholic to go in their door and be a part of what they were about. So when I went to Virginia, I was sent, in uniform to Virginia, serve on a ship down there. But I wanted to have a base, so I went over to the local Unitarian church. I said, "Is this going to be a problem? The newspaper says that they're photographing. The FBI is photographing people who come out of this place." And he said, "Well, I'm president of the local ACLU, and if you have a problem, see me." And I was part of a delegation of people from that church who were also Navy people and civilian contractors, workers for the military. We went to Richmond, Virginia to deliver a protest to Virginia's U.S. Senator Byrd. Everybody was respectful, and I never got in any trouble for it. I'm totally sure that my FBI file included that because I had to have one to be where I was. So that stayed. I came back, got up here in Albany, came back to this Albany church, and we gave rides to Salvadorian refugees. We had some live in the church for a while because there were death squads going on. And I'm sure you probably, well, I even voted for Richard Nixon, so I'm part of the problem. I can accept that. He sounded like a good idea at the time. But since then, and it's just come out, mass incarceration, drug laws. If you read in the papers, Nixon and Ehrlichman and others contrived these as a way to demonize their enemies, who were the war protesters and the blacks. You had black power. You had this movement. So the idea of getting rid of leaders is not really new. I think it goes back centuries. So it still was, so they were looking at doing this to people. That was being invented then. And so now it's like this year, I heard this document. It just goes on. Then there was what? And Nixon also contrived to continue the Vietnam War by sabotaging Lyndon Johnson's peace talks with the South Vietnam and North Vietnam. So he got a bunch of people killed. I personally think I'm going to ask Chris Gibson to introduce a resolution of impeachment, which is still legal, for Richard Nixon. He should be dishonored. This man committed treason and led to the deaths of 20,000 men in uniform. I take that very seriously and personally as a person from the uniform. So I think that's just not something that should lay there and be, it's not just history. And this goes on, and that should all bring out the mass incarceration and the other stuff that's going on here. So anyway, I'm on this thing called the Social Responsibilities Council, which gives me the feeling that I should go to a lot of meetings when something comes up. And you become aware of these things, whether it's Dottie Ivy. I mean, we formed the Black Lives Matter task force specifically for the issue when the grand jury in Staten Island said no charges against the Eric Garner's death, and we thought New York might be different. And then in Albany we see Dottie Ivy, nothing. This is a manipulation of the grand jury. District attorneys always get an indictment if they ask for one because they present only the evidence and then it goes to trial. But they can also squash evidence and say, yeah, well, they don't show it. They don't make a case for it. And the grand jury can't say, well, so it rides over. This district attorney asked for a special prosecutor and excused himself so that he would not have to prosecute the son of Albany County Sheriff Craig Apple. That boy was arrested for DWI. If he gets brought before the district attorney, he's got to be harsh with him. He's got policies. So he got a different, he asked for a special prosecutor. He didn't ask for a special prosecutor for Dottie Ivy. That was what the whole thing was about. So anyway, we also have Interfaith Impact, which is going to advocate various of these things for a better wage, for youthful offender status that really is such rather than treating them as that. So it keeps busy, and if anybody wants to do something on Sunday, come on down. Not sure, I think I made that point. One other point or two. I keep learning stuff. I went to a conference basically about George Bush's thing. George Bush convinced the nation that we needed to go to war on Iraq.
Which Bush?
GW, the second one. I was protested the first one also. This book is written by the county prosecutor of Los Angeles County who prosecuted the Manson trial. He makes a case in here that George Bush could be prosecuted for the murder of all of the American soldiers who died in the war in Iraq. Not for the Iraqis, another whole story. But for the Americans who he got killed on false pretenses, the false pretenses basically, he says, defrauding the people of the United States, pretty much the same charge that Ken Lay was prosecuted for the Enron. He presents false evidence, false stories, and the consequences are people died in his scheme. So that's why it goes to a murder charge, not just other things. It's just an interesting thing. And the other book is War is a Racket, which underlines every issue that we hear. It's the Citizens United, war is a racket to make money. And it does that. That was written by Major General Smedley Butler back before World War II, died before World War II. That book names the corporations and the leaders of corporations and banks who were making the money, who are still in existence now, and their grandsons are doing it. So if you want to see something that underlies all of these issues, wherever they're going on.
Mark? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, my name is Trish Flaherty, and I have to say something. As a former prosecutor myself, and I'm an advocate for women's rights and peace and everything that you represent, but I was a prosecutor in a former life, and the grand jury themselves are allowed to ask for any evidence they want. Now, people don't know that, so what you should be educating people that just the general public, hey, if you're called for grand jury duty, you should know you're allowed to ask for any evidence you think there might be, and they have to present it to you. The prosecutor must present it to you if you ask. Now, you may not know what to ask for, but you can educate people about what to ask for. I can tell you what to ask for, you know. And so there are some prosecutors that are truthful and good prosecutors. I just want to say that. They're not all the same. I don't disagree with you in the case in point. You're absolutely right in the case in point in which you stated what you stated. But the grand jury is also a secret proceeding. However, anybody involved in the prosecution or defense can ask for the grand jury minutes. So the defense attorney has a right to see the grand jury minutes if they ask for it under certain motions. And so they can see exactly what was presented, and they can say, Judge, the way this prosecutor presented it, and then this grand juror said this, and then he didn't do that, that can be remediated with a good defense attorney. However, that's another story, you know, the public defender's office, like who impanels them, who hires them, who do they work for, they're overworked, you know, and do they get a fair and just defense? Absolutely not.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because I strongly believe that people are very ignorant about the judicial process in this country. And one thing which, as a student of the law, I always tell people who might possibly sometime be called on jury trial in a criminal trial is a jury has the absolute right of jury nullification, even if the presiding judge says you can't do anything except answer these particular kinds of questions. However, there's one thing I didn't understand. If the grand jury doesn't find cause to prosecute, there is no case. So is there who has standing to get the minutes of the grand jury that dismissed any possible charges against any police in the Dante Ivey case?
The elected official, the district attorney himself or herself. That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
In other words, if
you have to
that...
trust your prosecutor.
Okay,
That's who you elect.
I just didn't want that to...
No, you're right.
You know, clearly,
Yeah,
if the
it's
grand
called a
jury
no-true
indicts,
When-
then the defense attorney can get the minutes.
Right,
But there's nobody
Well,
who can command the minutes.
right.
No indictment. Okay.
But,
Just
you
wanted
know,
to clarify.
jurors themselves are allowed to say whatever they want after the fact. They can talk to the public and the press. They don't
They're not-
realize that.
they're not compelled to be
Excuse
secret
me, that's right, afterwards.
I didn't hear what you said.
The jurors
can
themselves,
ask what?
and I'm talking, there's difference between a grand jury and a, what we call a petit jury, you know, a jury that's impaneled to hear the case, two different things. They, afterwards, they're instructed not to discuss it while it's going on, but once it's over, they can talk about anything they want. And there have been jurors who have talked about inappropriate proceedings within the jury itself and have caused cases to be reopened.
Mark?
That can happen. It's rare because people don't understand their own rights and what they can and can't do, which is part of my civic responsibility as an attorney and as an advocate to educate as many people as I can come across throughout my business.
I'm conscious of the fact that we're in the end game now. And
Thank you
still
very
need
much,
to-
though. That's
We
good
still need to
amplification.
hear from two reps here.
So, Jackie Jordan wanted to come tonight. Jackie's at a meeting, and she really wanted to come. And she's at a meeting with 12 other fast food and a couple cleaners and a home health aide and a waitress from Peace Area Uno, taking a strike vote tonight as part of the national strike vote to go on strike April 14th. They were completely and totally dissatisfied with what the deal the upstate New York got of $12.50 by 2021, and they spoke out against it, and they're going to continue speaking out against it. And their answer to that crappy deal is to go on strike April 14th. I raised Jackie because I met her about a year ago when she went out on strike on April 15th. Jackie's 50 years old. She was homeless at 14 when she dropped out of school. She's worked for McDonald's for 23 years, and she's lived in a motel room on Central Avenue, and not the one they tore down, or the one they're going to tear down, but the one they should tear down. And she's lived there for 8 years. The good news, at the end of the month, we're moving her through the work of unions, faith leaders, and activists, including myself, into an apartment where she'll be able to cook for the first time in 8 years in something other than a microwave. So that's really good news. Jackie, the day after that strike, we were meeting to walk her back to work, and we had religious folks and lawyers and activists and people with ties and stuff, and Phil Steck and Neil Breslin, to their credit, walking her back to work. And we were introducing ourselves, and when we got to her, she said, "My name's Jackie Jordan. I've spent my entire life looking at my feet, and yesterday was the first time I had my hood up." Where she felt her individual worth and collective worth of people like herself, that they're human beings and they have dignity. I want to thank Citizen Action for giving me the opportunity to know her and work with her and all these other workers. Jackie, about 6 months ago, went to a meeting with me at St. Vincent Church. Drove her there. We get done. There's a big meeting at Capital District Raise the Wage Coalition, talking about how to build a campaign so we could win something. At the end of it, on the way home, she started to cry because there was words at that meeting that she had no idea what they were. Initials, SEIU, 1199. I think you were at that meeting. We didn't, and she goes, "I don't know what it is. This is way over my head." Then I tell this story, as Jackie and 4 other fast food workers went with me last week to see Reverend William Barber speak at Siena. And he gave a very heady lecture, like I taught history. And he gave me stuff that I had to write down myself. Oh yeah, J.W. Hood, I'm going to look this up. The Constitution, 1868 in North Carolina, Revolutionary Constitution, all these things. At the end of it, they stood up there holding his hand on the stage with them. And they came to me at the end of it, including Jackie, and said, "Would you tell us about the stuff we didn't understand?" But they were no longer intimidated by the fact, because in struggle, they learned in leaps and bounds, and now they view themselves completely differently. And so he said some things. He was talking about King's Poor People's Campaign, the work Dr. King did in his last year of his life, the assassination of him because he spoke out against empire, and he used the word poor people, and he talked about those things. And so they asked me, some of the questions they've asked me is, empire, America's an empire? It's a war on working people and poor people here and around the world? All of those things, militarism, all of that stuff, trillions of dollars spent slaughtering people around the world, how does it relate to that state house in Albany where we go and beg for crumbs? How does this relate? How does this fit in? So it's my responsibility, and well, your responsibility, and anyone else we can find, to help these worker leaders who are coming into real politics and real struggle to view this as broad as possible so they can lead in this direction. Jackie said to me when we were leaving the Capitol around some of this fight recently, how can we get these people, the Assembly folks and who sold us out, and the Senate folks, which we expect to sell us out, and the governor who used it as a campaign thing for himself, how can we get these people to understand? And I said, that's not our job. Our job is to get 20 more of you, 30 more of you, 40 more of you, people like you, to come into politics, and let's build a movement that we can end the system that creates poverty and war for once and for all. And I don't care what we call it, and I don't care what, but I know that just like getting her out of that hotel room, we've got to get all of us out of that hotel room and get to a world where there can be good stuff instead of just pain. Right. That's all I got to say.
Hi, I'm Pepe Rossi, and I'm with Albany Cuba Solidarity. I participated in my first rally in support of Cuba's right for self-determination as a 16-year-old at the University of Puerto Rico, 16-year-old freshman back in 1967. And because I've often talked about Cuba and can sometimes be a bit long-winded, I wrote it down to stick to the 3 minutes that we were told to stick to. So I'm going to read it. I hope you can bear with it. Cuba's international role in the fight against oppression around the world is well known. From its international solidarity efforts that were a decisive factor in liberating Angola and Namibia, as well as ending apartheid in South Africa, to assist in liberation movements in Central and South America, and currently in mediating the Colombian peace talks. What I'm trying to do is to articulate the connections to many other groups that are participating here. In recent years, Cuba's international solidarity has been expressed through medical and humanitarian assistance to dozens of countries in 6 continents, and more recently contributing more to fight the Ebola outbreak than any other country, as well as providing free medical education to the poor in over 70 nations, including the United States. Less well known but equally meaningful is Cuba's leadership in sustainable development. According to the World Wildlife Fund, Cuba is the only nation in the world that has met sustainable development goals, scoring high in the Human Development Index and low in the Footprint Index. Indeed, Cuba is contributing much to the world in the fields of environmental protection, sustainable agriculture, reducing dependence on carbon fuels, marine resource conservation, and organic farming. Cuba has been one of the most consistent supporters of the Palestinian people in the international scene. Cuba has not only been very vocal in the support of the Palestinian right of return, in ending the occupation, as well as the Israeli system of apartheid, but has been very generous in providing medical, educational, and other humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. Cuba's campaign to fight sexism, racism, and homophobia have also inspired similar efforts throughout the Third World, and sometimes in the first one too. Finally, it is worthwhile to consider why would it be that the United States has waged such a fierce campaign for over 50 years trying to defeat the Cuban Revolution? Why is it that the United States has been willing to expend so much political capital pressuring most every nation on earth to blockade Cuba, to bar Cuba from international courts, to vote against Cuba and for the blockade again and again at the United Nations? Something that has ended up isolating the United States. In the most recent 5 years, only Israel has supported the United States boycott against Cuba, and every other nation member of the United Nations has voted against that resolution. What on earth would lead the United States to launch biological warfare, like the time they introduced a virus that forced Cuba to eliminate its entire population of pigs? Or set so many sugarcane fields on fire, to sabotage Cuban ships, to blow up Cuban ships, to planes, and even a department store? Why has the United States spent so many millions and continues to spend so many millions? Last week, they closed a request for proposals to fund, I believe it was $9 million for destabilization of Cuba. Despite everything that Obama has been claiming to do, the U.S. Agency for International Development continues to spend millions of dollars every year to destabilize Cuba, to foment dissent in that island. So many more acts of sabotage, terrorism, and economic warfare that I don't have time to enumerate here. There are many reasons, but certainly part of the answer of why the United States has done so much against this island is that Cuba represents for the entire world, even for the United States itself, but especially for Latin America, an alternative model of organizing their economy, another way of providing medical and humanitarian assistance, another set of priorities that is more conducive to world peace. People that understand Latin America and geopolitics better than most of us here tonight have said the success of progressive movements in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Nicaragua, in Uruguay, and many other nations in the region would not have been possible were it not for the Cuban Revolution. So if it is important for the imperialists to fight to undermine and overthrow the Cuban Revolution, it is all the more important for those of us that support peace and justice, anti-imperialism, the world over, to support Cuba. In short, whether for its international efforts against colonialism, apartheid, and other systems of oppression, international medical and humanitarian assistance, fight against illiteracy and for educational equity, struggles for environmental conservation, sustainable development, and reducing dependence on fossil fuels, rights of the Palestinian people, or its campaigns to eliminate sexism, racism, and homophobia, the Cuban Revolution has been and continues to be a very prominent and influential example to those of us fighting for peace and justice in the United States and the world over for over 5 decades. The interconnections of our struggle to support Cuba's right to self-determination and for an end of the embargo with many other peace and justice groups in our capital region certainly has served a place for us here at this round table, and we're very grateful that we're here, and your support to Cuba. And finally, it is important to support Cuba because we can see that we've had recent very important victories, and because the end of this tunnel is visible, and because we can see approaching the light of justice for Cuba in the near future. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, Dave, does anyone have a burning issue that they would like to raise from the floor? I'm sorry that we were all a little bit extra long, but I found it very interesting. Yeah.
Is there anybody here who is advocating for women's rights, feminist majority, reproductive freedom?
I don't know anybody here who isn't, but... Oh, who isn't, yes. We actually have a platform for that in our advocacy day that we'll be doing in May.
And what about equal pay? I mean,
Yes.
I understand the minimum wage issue,
Yeah.
but there's another issue that has existed for so long that gets, pushed aside, always, to the greater good.
We're doing it.
Okay, I'd like to
Need
talk
more.
to you.
They exist. They're not.
It's a good point you've made. I mean, we could easily have included Planned Parenthood and now another women's advocacy groups in this.
That, the umbrella group that's over at blanking out, that what the women's building was part of, what? Holding our own is not here, you're holding our own. I thought you might be, yeah.
Does anybody have a billionaire in their back pocket? Because that is the essential thing that I think we mostly lack, is that huge amount of money to either create 2 or 3 films that might be nationally viewed, to really get the issues. You don't get the media to broadcast 9 to 5 when it's a timely issue that might bring up some of the issues. You don't get the media to put on, China Syndrome, when we're looking at the meltdown over in Japan. Those are scary things. Or The Day After Tomorrow that shows wild climate changes.
Or
but when you see the cold come down from the Arctic Pole all the way past Albany, something weird's going on, but those
How about
media
the
don't
fact
get it.
that the media put out all these video bites of Planned Parenthood supposedly selling, right? It was all a hoax.
Yep.
It was not true. Is there any media coverage of the fact that they lie? No.
No.
You can read it in Ms. Magazine, and I might be the only subscriber of Ms. Magazine in all of Bethlehem.
Democracy Now!
Okay, good.
Yeah, let's see. Anyone in the back who has been aching to get into the conversation?
Michael, I'd just like to point out that we have to be.
Yeah, we have only 3 minutes.
You're in no.
Michael, is there any follow-up that you want to do to our discussion?
Did people get to sign up and put their names down if they want to be directly contacted?
Michael, is there any follow-up that you want to do with the discussion?
We'll need to talk to them.
Michael, is there any follow-up that you want to do with the discussion?
Well, that's a
Someone
good
mentioned,
question.
Coordinating committee or some kind of way of linking, and it doesn't have to be done in the next 3 minutes. I mean, it can be done through other forms of communication too, but perhaps that's something, and perhaps some of the places where we saw some lacking, such as women's issues, and immigrant rights issues, and others that I could think of.
Let me wrap up.
And social media.
Let me wrap up for a couple of minutes. I do not have a specific agenda except to recognize that we won't have peace without justice, and we won't have justice without peace. I think it's necessary for some interests to be the sharp focus of some people. For instance, there are any number of groups that go after research to deal with particular diseases. But to tell you the truth, I don't see them integrated into the broader issue of justice. Certainly, women, as is the case with blacks, as is the case with Muslims in this country, as is predominantly the case with indigenous American Indians, are victims of apartheid and of injustice. And they absolutely deserve spokespeople to keep reminding us, and I certainly am very grateful to Sister CANY and to Sister Naomi for getting directly involved with people who are the victims of injustice, and certainly, and you're absolutely right, women are getting a relatively short shrift, not as short as a number of other people, not as short as Palestinians in occupied territory.
Also, some of them are women.
Women's rights are human rights.
I think it's how do you weave something?
Can I make a suggestion?
Bigger.
Maybe we can, Bethlehem Neighbors Peace can write a report of what happened at this meeting and who came together, and maybe can be sent out through our email list, which is around 800, which I think most people are on. If you're not, you can sign up here and be on it. And we can also put in that report a little form where people could click if they would like to continue to have, for instance, some kind of coordinating committee. Would your organization like to continue this discussion? Could you put a representative from your committee? And we could have a group of people that, you know, maybe periodically could meet, or once or twice a year, as was suggested, do something on a number of the issues that we're talking about, or some, at least some informal or formal way of staying together at whatever level our energy allows us to do. Does that sound like that might be workable?
It's great that we have some really good organizers among us activists, and I would say that you and Naomi are two of the sharpest organizers that I know.
So we'll do that, right?
I'll mention that on our church website, First Unitarian, one of the meeting, second Tuesday of the month, is it, I think, CANY meets. We have that on our webpage, just to inform everybody who goes to it. And you can also sign up for our newsletter, which goes to a bunch of people beyond the people who go on Sundays. So in that newsletter, which is weekly, things like this are mentioned. Myself and others make sure they are, so that if you want to get some more in touch, and I think, you know,
if we don't get out of here in 5 minutes, we're in deep trouble.
I was going to listen, but yeah.
Thank you,
And you know what? I'm a lawyer and a social advocate, so this is what I learned. So I can be helpful and find homes or relations.
What's your name? Trish Flaherty. I don't think I ever met you.
You haven't signed the same
And it's Russell Sage, so
Somebody's dead.
So you represent, what is this? Okay.
Who would have to have?
So you went
I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to talk to you. I'd love to have you come and talk about the rights. I never heard what you were saying. I'm cheating.